All right. Well, we're here with Jennifer Hamdorf, and Jennifer is actually my sister. So I know her story a little bit, but I think she's got, a lot of interesting things to say. So, Jen, I think what I'd like you to do first is just tell me a little bit about the day that the Derecho hit, where you were, and what you were doing during that time.
Yeah. So I live on the southwest side of Cedar Rapids. And so the day started super normal. It was actually like a really nice, sunny, normal day. And it was like around the lunch hour. So I was taking my dogs for a walk and the sky got black like really quick. Like everything happened really quickly. And I think I was like 4 houses away from my house with my dogs when the tornado sirens went off, which isn't necessarily like a rare thing in Iowa in the summer or fall. We have tornado watches and warnings or thunderstorm watches or warnings fairly often. So I wasn't like that nervous about it. But I obviously got home quickly with the dogs and put them inside. And I started cooking myself lunch and I put food in the microwave. And then like all of a sudden, like it started raining and the wind started picking up really strong. And so I was like, we better go in the basement. And I still didn't really think much of it, but I took the dogs down there and we have kind of like a storage room in our basement with no windows. So we were down there for a bit and I kept like peeking out of the storage area and I could see kind of out our basement window and the wind was so strong and I was like kind of watching it for a bit. And then all of a sudden, like a huge gust of wind came and I could see a tree in the backyard. It was a younger tree. So it was flexible, but it like bent all the way to the ground and back up. And I was like, holy crap. And like, it looked like a wall of like wind or rain, like came at the window. And so immediately I called my husband and I was like, Ryan, the storm is crazy. Like because he works in Mount Vernon, which is about 20 minutes away from Cedar Rapids. And so I called him and I was like, I'm scared. Like this storm is crazy. And he was like, yeah, you're fine. It's just a little bit of rain and a little bit of wind. And I was like, I think there's a tornado out there. And he was like, you'll be okay. And so I stayed in the basement with my dogs. And after maybe like 10 minutes, the power ended up going out, which was a little spooky because I didn't necessarily know where like our flashlights or anything were. And like I said, that area that I was in didn't have a window. So I just used my phone and turned on my flashlight and we kind of just stayed in the basement and I kept like peeking out every once in a while, but I would see some scary stuff out the window. So then I would go back in. And like I saw through the basement window, I could see part of our deck was laying on the ground. So I knew obviously the wind was really bad. And at one point I saw we have like a big heavy pellet grill and it blew over. And that like scared me a little bit too. So it took about 30 or 35 minutes. And during the time I was trying to text people, but my texts weren't going through. And so eventually I felt like it had ended enough where I felt safe enough to come out of the basement. And so I went upstairs and looked outside and things were, hi Rowan. And things were, there was like, I almost couldn't believe my eyes. There was stuff everywhere, like patio furniture was everywhere. Like all of our recycling and trash bins were everywhere. Our particular neighborhood doesn't have a lot of mature trees, so I didn't really know the extent of the damage, but there was shingles from roofs everywhere. There was broken windows, and it was insane. And so I started trying to call some people. I was able to get a hold of my mom, but the cell service was really spotty, so I knew my mom was okay. I knew my dad was at the gym, but that my mom had heard from him and he was okay. So I started trying to call our sister Mel that lives here, but I couldn't get a hold of her. I didn't know if she was at home with Oakley or if she was at work. It ended up she was in Solon at work and Oakley was at daycare.
And Melanie lives really close to you, like
Yes.
super
So then the
close.
next thing I did was, because I started seeing some of the damage, my sis Mel lives like 2 blocks from us. So I was like, I'm gonna run over to Mel's house and just make sure her dogs are okay and her house is okay. And so I didn't want to walk because it was still rainy and there was power lines down, and so I didn't want to have to like walk through power lines when it was wet. So I got in our car and just drove the 2 blocks over to her house. And I actually couldn't get to her house because there was a big, her neighborhood has a little bit more mature trees. So there was a big tree that had toppled over across the street. So I parked a few houses away and walked to her house. And her neighbor had the garage missing, which really scared me. And Mel's house had similar damage to mine, which was, she was missing part of her deck and some shingles from her roof, and things like that. So I went in and checked in on her dogs, and they were doing okay. So I went back home, and at this point, I was still trying to get a hold of Mel because I hadn't heard from her. I just wanted to make sure that all my family was okay. So I called her, and she was on her way home from Solon, and things weren't that bad out there. So I don't think she fully understood what was going on yet. And she said she was going to go pick up Oakley, and that the daycare had texted her and said, please answer your phone. And at that point, that really scared me. And so Mel said her phone wasn't working. It was really spotty. Mine was too. So I tried to call the daycare to make sure that everyone was okay. And at that point, I was like having a hard time breathing. I could feel myself having sort of a panic attack. And so I did get a hold of daycare. They confirmed that all of the kids were safe. It's kind of an older building. So after seeing some of the damage done to the newer homes around here, I was really nervous about the old building that she was in. But I got confirmation that she was okay. But I still started kind of having a panic attack, and I ended up passing out in my living room. But luckily, my mom and dad were on our way over to my house to make sure I was okay. And so they walked in soon, like kind of as it was happening. And so they were able to help me kind of through it and make sure that I wasn't like passed out for too long by myself. And so it was a really scary day. And then eventually Ryan, my husband, got home. It took him almost an hour, even though it usually takes him 20 minutes just because of all the traffic and all the trees down, all the power lines down. It took Mel about an hour to get home from the daycare, which is usually only a 10-minute drive. And so it was just complete chaos. And it was definitely one of the scariest days that I've kind of lived through.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, thinking about everything that happened, and just kind of what you described, the scenario of looking up and all of a sudden seeing, your deck on the floor or on the ground, and seeing the trees be basically blown over. I mean, that's not something, you imagine that you'd see in your lifetime, I'm sure. What was kind of going through your head as that was happening? What kind of sounds were you hearing when you were in the basement with your dogs? Were they
Yeah.
barking as well? Kind of, were they going nuts, or were they quiet and, understanding that something was going on? What was all that like?
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking is I was 100% sure that a tornado had come through. It looked like it due to the extent of the damage. We obviously learned later on that it wasn't a tornado, that it was like basically hurricane-like winds. But it was part of the reason that it was scary being in the basement was because there was a lot of noises. Things were hitting our house. I don't know exactly what all hit our house, but I have to assume, patio furniture. And you could just hear the wind like whipping through, shingles getting torn off the roof, things like that. So the sounds were definitely really scary. My dogs actually did really well. I think they could tell I was pretty anxious. So they didn't bark like at all. They stayed in the room with me, and they were like trying to figure out what was going on, but they weren't like upset or like freaking out or anything. My one dog, Banksy, is kind of a scaredy cat, and so he just had his tail between his legs and wanted to be, right by me. We have like a sauna in our basement, and at one point I was sitting in it and he came in it with me, which was kind of funny because it's small and it was tight squeeze, but he just wanted to be by me. And a couple of times I sat down, and my one dog, Goose, he's more of like the protective type. So he was like standing over me and like trying to like sort of protect me and make sure that I was safe, because I think he could tell that I was scared. So they both were really good during the storm, I would say. I think it would be worse if they were barking and freaking out, but they were kind of in like protective or like scared mode, sort of.
That's good. Yeah, I think, obviously there are some dogs that just freak out at loud noises and storms
Yeah.
and everything. So I can imagine that would be a lot harder when, you're
Yeah.
trying to make it through yourself and being all alone through that.
Yeah. I could just tell that they were confused about why we were, in that little room together and why we couldn't leave. And yeah, so they were good.
Yeah, that's good. So how long do you think you were, kind of in the basement in storm mode before you felt like it was probably safe enough for you to come out and not just pop
Yeah.
your head out, but, leave and check on everybody else?
It felt like forever, just because, I mean, you don't know when it's you don't have any idea when it's going to end. But it definitely was like 30 to 35 minutes, because I know I get home from my walk with my dogs at 12:30, and I remember leaving the basement and going upstairs a little bit after 1 o'clock. So I know the storm lasted about that long. And when I did walk upstairs too, our ceilings were dripping. And there was like standing water in our dining room that had blown in from like our glass like sliding door. So there was like water. There was a lot of water in our house. Like nothing that I don't think it caused like necessarily long-term damage to our floor, but we definitely have damage to like our ceilings from the water that was dripping in. So I put buckets down, and then I kind of left the house to go try to see what else was going on in the neighborhood and with my family.
Absolutely. So what did you see when you came outside? I've seen, some of the pictures of trees kind of being uprooted and just kind of the destruction. I know we'll throw up a couple of pictures here. Maybe I should do that now.
Yeah.
So let's see here. I'm going to throw up there a picture of, I think, let me see. Did you sent a picture of your regular deck, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before.
No.
Oh, that was afterwards. Okay. So let's see. Can you see it or?
Not yet.
Oh,
Loading. There we go.
okay.
Yeah, so this was obviously one of the first things I saw because it was the damage to our house. So as you can see, the side railing of our deck was kind of ripped off, and so it was laying on the ground on the other side. So we had lights around our porch, so you can see those hanging. There's kind of like a fireplace thing on our deck that was on the ground, but at this point in the photos, my husband had picked it up and put it back on the deck. But all of our patio furniture was kind of scattered throughout on the side of our lawn. And we were missing all of our cushions. Yep, that's kind of what it looked like. This sort of brown thing by the deck, like sort of up toward the top of the deck railing, that was like a storage bin that we kept all of our cushions in, and it was just completely ripped apart. And like I said, some of our cushions were all the way down at the end of the street. Some of our cushions were all the way up at the other end of the street. And so things were kind of just blown all over the neighborhood. And so, yeah, that's kind of a good picture. There's a lot of fences that were down or ruined, or things that were crashed through the fences.
Got a new picture up here.
Yeah, so this is one of my neighbors' houses. They had an airplane wing crash into their roof. So not too far from our home, there's a business that fixes airplane parts. And so they had been working on an airplane wing that day, and it had blown from the warehouse into their home. And I ended up talking to that guy for a little while, and he said that they had like a wind expert come in and told them that the wind gusts were up to 140 miles per hour, and that's kind of how it blew that into his home. And he said that when he first came out of his house, he wasn't sure where it came from, and he has little children in the home, and he told his wife, like, don't let the kids out. This might have came from the sky, and there might be bodies. And so I think he was terrified when he saw that too.
Totally. I can't imagine like what kind of thoughts, you come out of your house after a big storm and lots of noise and this is what you see.
Yeah.
That would be really intimidating.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just nuts. So you
Yeah.
go through all of that, and then let me see here. I can pull up another picture or two. Let's see. Do you have just some of the, I think that's is that another picture of your house?
Yep, that's just another picture of the
Okay.
view from looking down.
Got it. So you come out, then you go to Mel's house and check on the dogs, check on on your niece, trying to call the daycare.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine what that would feel like, thinking about, how that daycare, and obviously I know it too. We both worked there and we went there as children. So understanding all that, like, what were you thinking about, and how did it feel like to have to go through those emotions? What was it like for you?
Yeah, obviously it was super terrifying. That's the only time in my life that I've had a panic attack or passed out. So I think that tells you um, all of the kind of adrenaline emotions I was going through. I was certain that there were people that were not alive. Luckily, I think only 2 people did end up dying from the storm. I truly think it's a miracle that there wasn't more. Like, I'm showing you guys mine damage, but this is barely anything compared to what some other people have gone through. Yes, so this is an apartment building near our home. So the very first night after it happened, we drove around, which was actually kind of dangerous because, again, there was power lines down and none of the stoplights were working. So there were actually quite a few car accidents that first night from people just not paying attention. It's just like things you don't think about when you don't have power, like how many things run off of power. But this was one of the apartment buildings near our home. And as you can see, people's homes were completely destroyed. There's people that are just living basically under tarps still, even after, 3 weeks
I was gonna
post.
say it's 3 weeks since the storm and they're still living under tarps.
Yep, because they've got no place to go, and their homes were ruined. So it's really.
I am done, Mom.
Okay.
It'll be a while before things are back to normal.
Yeah.
And just seeing something like this in person is just unreal. I mean, you could literally go to those people's houses and see, some of them still had their couches or,
Mm-hmm.
fridges and things like in their homes. And so it's just crazy to think about them. I'm not sure if any of these people were at home, but what would be going through your head if you were home and this was happening?
I'm so tired.
Yeah, I know, buddy. Give us a few more minutes, and we got a couple more things we want Jennifer to tell us about, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
And then we can finish our comic book.
Okay, then we'll finish our comic book. Can you tell us a little bit about this? What is this a picture of?
So this is actually the building that my dad was in when the storm hit. So this is the MAC, he was at the gym. It was his gym, and he was in the bathroom. And he said there was like 5 or 6 other people there. And obviously he's safe and okay. But just looking at this again, he said that he was also very scared, obviously. I can't even imagine the kind of the noises and the images that he was seeing during the storm, but I'm really thankful he's safe, especially after seeing this building. There was multiple people who texted me, you know, in the days after the storm that were like, have you seen the Mac on 16th Ave? That building looks awful. And I always text them back and I say, my dad was inside that building. And he has a video from the inside as well. So hopefully if you get the opportunity to talk to him, yep, there's another photo of it from the outside. It's obviously completely damaged. They'll just have to tear that down. But hopefully he can share some of his story too.
Yeah. I think just kind of like seeing the picture, I you know, it's hard to imagine being inside of there and like then walking out.
Yes.
Because there's just so much there.
Luckily his car was there and still intact. A lot of people's cars were damaged due to trees falling on them, or, you know, windows being blown out or things being blown into the cars. And so luckily his car was still there and intact, so he was able to, you know, drive home safely. But
as I speak of the devil.
Yep. There's a photo so the days after the storm, like we had zero power and zero internet. And so the storm happened on a Monday. And so obviously normally what I would have been doing.
I know the storm happened on Monday.
Yeah.
You knew that?
Yeah.
Oh, you're smart.
Yeah.
And so normally I would be working from home, but since there was no power, no internet, there was no way to work. I mean, there was no power, no internet in the entire city, and even in a lot of the areas surrounding the city, so I couldn't go anywhere else either. So the days after the storm, we helped people basically with tree cleanup and storm cleanup. So both of my parents had two big trees in their back. My parents had two trees in their backyard, and so we helped them kind of cut up the trees and put them in the front. So this is one of the piles that we helped with. And as you can see, it's a pretty big pile. Yeah, there's a picture of the trees that were down.
That's Grandma and Grandpa's house.
Yeah. That is Grandma and Grandma's house. Do you remember those trees?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna look different next time we visit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see, I mean, how much we had to clean up. That's pretty laid across their pretty much entire yard.
Yeah, it's just crazy to think about, just to see some of these pictures that are coming up, because you know, you just never really think about all those places, and whenever, you know, you kind of watch the news or see it in other places, you're like, oh, you know, that looks terrible, but none of it's familiar, and then all of a sudden you see all these familiar places to you being completely, you know, destroyed. It's just such a different type of experience and feeling.
And I also feel like, too, a lot of the videos do it a lot more justice than the photos, because you can see a photo and be like, wow, that looks bad. But then at the same time, what people don't understand, I think, that haven't been here, is that is what it looks like mile after mile after mile after mile through the entire city. So it's not just like a block, you know, it's not just one person's backyard, it's everyone. So the extent of the damage is crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot to think about, and I know a lot to take in, and you're there, you know, that's where you live, that's where you've been for the past 3 weeks, and so I have to see that day after day. So thinking about, you know, the time after the storm, you talked about not having power, you know, helping with the recovery efforts. What other things have you been doing, or, you know, kind of in the wake of all of this, what's it been like to live in Cedar Rapids?
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, everyone says like Iowa is a great community, but it's one of those things you don't realize it until something like this happens. And so there's, I mean, been a lot of really cool community things that have been going on, which has been great. A lot of cleanup efforts, a lot of, you know, people restaurants going around handing out free food, doing things like that. The first 2 days after the storm, obviously the priority was helping out family and friends. So we went around to both my family and then Ryan's family and helped with a lot of the tree cleanup and things like that. And then most recently, last weekend, I helped out at just kind of a pop-up volunteer effort that was put together. And they're giving out food and tarps and water and, flashlights, gloves, things like that for people who need it, charcoal for people who still don't have power or access to, cook food through their normal means. And so I volunteered there for a couple of hours, and it's crazy to see, so many weeks after the storm, the people that still need so much and still don't have power. It's really hot here, so I can't imagine not having
It's really hot there.
Is it hot in
air
Chicago too?
conditioning
Yeah.
or even the ability to, use a fan.
Right.
But volunteering there was a good experience. Being able to help people out, everyone was very grateful for what the organization's trying to do. So there's a lot of good efforts going on. I just hope that they continue. Sometimes it can be easy to lose sight, as things start to get cleaned up and people move on. But hopefully people will continue to help out through as long as people need it.
Right. Yeah. And I think about, obviously this isn't the first, disaster that Cedar Rapids has been through, in the past 15 years. Obviously in 2008, we had a large flood. And I know, I was living there at that point, and it was devastating. And to see the amount of loss that people had at that point, and, to know that this is bigger because it hit the entire city and not just, several square miles of it in certain parts of it. But I think like you said, one of the things is that it just took, I think, probably 2 to 3 years even from that point for the city to feel like it was in a spot where you weren't constantly reminded of what happened during the flood, what happened, the destruction, and people were able to rebuild their lives a little bit and their businesses. Could you talk a little bit about the comparison between then and now, and what you think the city is up against, I guess, in trying to come back and recover from what the Derecho did?
Yeah, so the flood happened, as you said, in 2008. I was 17 at the time, and so I feel like I was still kind of, a young, naive teenager. I totally remember, seeing the damage from the flood and hearing about it, and feeling like I wanted to help. But I also know that I was not directly impacted. And so I don't think it had as much of an impact on me as the storm did, because even though, it happened not far from where I lived, I was also a bit removed from it, I guess. And then obviously with the storm, losing power and internet, lots of people lost their homes in the flood, which is awful. But this, knocked out an entire city for weeks in terms of what we were able to do. So it's a little like, I feel like the storm has hit me pretty hard, and I don't know if it's because of more of the direct impact or if it's just because I'm older and more mature and realize kind of what's going on and how devastating it is to a city. It'll be interesting to see how we pick ourselves back up from this. I feel like we did a really good job in 2008. Like you said, it took a long time, but I feel like the city of Cedar Rapids is better than it's ever been. The flood, caused a lot of damage, but a lot of good things came out of it too, in terms of, revamping our downtown area. I hope that we're able to come back from the storm, but I also feel like the combination of the pandemic and the storm might be enough to close a lot of businesses in the area. I hope that's not the case, but only time will tell. I feel like we will hopefully be able to recover a bit faster. I don't think, although a lot of homes had significant damage, there have been a lot of people from other states coming and helping, and I think a lot of people, it's just going to be repairs rather than hopefully we can recover quicker. I mean, we kind of know what we're doing, even though it's a flood versus it's we've been there and we've done that, and I think we can do.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, there's just so much to be done. So it'll be interesting to see how the next few months go.
I'm sorry, Mom. Mom.
Sorry, my connection went out. Are you there, Jen? Well, technical difficulties. But
we need the red marker.
Oh, there you are. Well, thank you, Jen, so much for sharing with us. This has been, definitely eye-opening, and I know it's not an easy thing to like relive all of that and to process all of it. And I'm sure you and everybody else is still processing it. So thank you so much for doing that. And like I said, sharing all this with me. Is there anything else that you wanted to say before we wrap up here?
Thank you for taking the time to do this. I think it'll be really good to have kind of a record, especially when it's still fresh in our mind. So I appreciate you taking the time to do.
All right, well, I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Bye, Rowan.
Bye, JJ.
Bye, buddy.